But if you don't have this umbrella over your head, the shells are gonna rain. Oh, the cope is so hard. And then
It is a Russian victory, unfortunately for the Ukrainian side.
How do you see the evolution of the battlefield in the next few weeks? And in a way, for the Ukrainians, it was a good teaching as to what the Russians might do elsewhere on the front.
The Ukrainians is going to come. They have no choice. They have to come.
Especially because they have lost so many troops trying out those different tactics.
But DPA, the battle of attrition is going in favor of Ukraine. This is what the media is saying. 4 months of training is obviously enough.
4 months.
4 months. Yeah. It's takes some people more time to drive cars, but I guess F-16 is easier. I don't know. New World Econ, what's happening?
Yeah. So and you're talking about that in the context of.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this exceptional roundtable with the entire crew. So we have New World Econ, we have Web Union, and we have Defense Politics Asia that you probably all have already heard about. So guys, thank you for joining this special invitation. And first question, who actually controls Bakhmut?
I'm not really sure, but I can make a guess. I assume no one, because now apparently the city is called Artemovsk, and that is because the Russians control it.
Shots fired! Shots fired! Apparently, the southwest of the city is still in Ukrainian hands, and actually the city is in semi-encirclement. That's what the mainstream media, that's what they're talking about.
But that's pro-Russian propaganda. Actually, the name is called Wagnerland. It's been renamed Wagnerland. Yeah, by the conqueror.
Emotional damage.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty clear. All jokes aside, it seems pretty clear to everyone that the Russians now control Bakhmut. The area in question, which potentially could be under, which could have some presence from the Ukrainians, doesn't even really seem to have any structures in it. We don't really have a map pull up right now. I guess we could pull one up, but it's in the far southwest corner of town along the 0504 highway. Am I correct in saying that? And we just know the frontline trenches are somewhere in that area. But in terms of like occupying any actual structures, it seems like possibly they control maybe like a small sliver of the land that's technically within city limits. But in terms of what you're saying about the mainstream media, it's absolutely abhorrent how bad the reporting is from the mainstream media on the situation. You could say you can debate a lot of different facts and topics that many of us talk about every day on our channels, casualty numbers and equipment losses and ammunition and who's fighting with what kind of shovel. It doesn't really matter. When it comes right down to it, here we have 9 months after the start of this battle, the Russians have taken control of the field. It is a Russian victory, unfortunately for the Ukrainian side. So that's not the message you're getting in the mainstream media at all. Pretty much 2 days before the fall of Bakhmut, we're getting all of these articles from mainstream media that are saying, the Ukrainians are taking back ground, the battle's not over. And even on the day of, you have articles coming out saying that the battle's not over and, Ukraine is, gaining an upper hand. And then here we have this big announcement with, a plethora of video and photographic evidence that, Russian Wagner mercenaries do control, Bakhmut. And it seems clear. And it seems like even from Ukrainian channels, a lot of Ukrainian Telegram channels are confirming this. We're seeing a lot of footage of Ukrainian troops that are actually evacuating the area that are saying exactly that the Russians control Bakhmut. It's pretty much indisputable. And I think the worst part of the reporting is essentially, some outlets are acknowledging the fact that Bakhmut is under Russian control, and that in the same sentence, in the same breath, they're saying, but that is a loss. And in what way? How is it possibly a loss for the Russians to take control over the field, and like it just doesn't make any sense at all. What do you think? Like,
I'm
you
reading
read the same news I do.
I'm reading right now the news, and Washington Post says Russia controls Bakhmut for now, but holding it will be difficult. I'm like, come on. Oh, the cope is so hard. And then there's the Wall Street Journal that we love, that's super accurate, that says Wagner says 20,000 of its troops have died. That's Prigozhin. He said it.
Honestly, we could talk about this for a minute, because very surprising statements coming from Yevgeny Prigozhin on this, because the Russians, and I might definitely have people that disagree with me on this, but I don't really care. But the Russians have, in my opinion, been just as bad as the Ukrainians throughout the war, reporting their casualties. I remember it was like 6 or 8 months into the conflict, and they were only claiming to have a couple thousand dead. So here you have Yevgeny Prigozhin in his statement saying that Wagner had 10,000 KIA in the Battle of Bakhmut and 10,000 wounded in action. Now, you can debate if those numbers are accurate or not. They're probably not.
Just a quick correction. He says that the Ukrainian casualties are 50,000 killed and 82,000 wounded, and then the Russian or the Wagner casualties are 3.2 times fewer dead and 2 times fewer wounded. So
I think he
of
made
the
a specific
50,000, he
statement.
mentions prisoners.
Okay, that's what it was.
Of which 10,000 were dead and 10,000 were wounded. So there's actually 15,000 killed and 35,000 wounded.
Even then, I don't think we should take the numbers from Prigozhin like as a fact. I think he loves to troll the Western media because they're gonna take every word that he says. They're going to take it seriously. So that's why you have headlines that say, the Kremlin's Pyrrhic victory in Bakhmut from the Institute of the Study of War. Super serious, super accurate, like we all know. They love to take back what he wrote. So I'm not 100% sure we can take what he says face value. The reason why is because I looked it up, and actually, according to Mediazona, so the BBC related website that counts casualties according to social media posts and whatnot, they say 4,000 inmates have been KIA plus 1,500 actual Wagner fighters. That's a total of 5,500, roughly. 5,500 since the beginning of the war. So it's not even in Bakhmut only. And now he says 20,000. So there's a huge range in this.
Well, I think it's indisputable that both sides have significant casualties. I mean, that seems to be very clear to me. But like debating about what the exact number is, nobody knows what these exact numbers are outside of the commanders of these units that these casualties are happening in, and probably, I mean, just the commanders of the armies in general. This is like, I would think this would be, running an army 101, as you want to make sure that if you do have dead and you do have casualties, you want to take account for those. That way you can send in replacements. That way you can stop sending paychecks to accounts. There's a lot of different reasons. It matters for logistics and whatnot. So, I mean, both sides definitely know what their casualties are, but I don't think the public is going to get a straight up honest answer from either side what they are. But, I mean, honestly, I don't really think it matters. I don't think that there has been really solid evidence coming from either side that they inflicted outsized casualties on the other side, outside of we inflict more casualties on the enemy than they inflict on us. Just that statement right there. Both sides say it every day. What have we seen in terms of evidence? It's like the only evidence we have of who actually had a victory in this fight is who controls the battlefield right now, and that's the Russians. And in terms of all the casualty stuff, like, it's not even,
What do you think, DPA?
20,000. Let's say the battle is around 200 days. That's basically 100 killed a day. So no, not seeing 20,000 bodies on the ground is pretty normal, and maybe out of the 100 who died, maybe 20 is just disintegrated. They're just gone forever. Maybe they just exploded into pieces. So I do not think that is impossible per se. Generally, my followers all know that I don't really care about casualty numbers. Generally speaking, because no one is honest. Everybody just make up their own numbers. So I always stick to a 1-to-1 ratio. Whoever dares to say they inflicted X number of casualties, then probably they are projecting as well. You cannot count your enemy's casualties. That's the problem, especially when you're using artillery, you're using airstrikes. How would you possibly know how many people is in one building? So the only way is that you know your own, and you probably get some intel from intercepting radio communications when they are doing their sit rep to their officers in their HQ or the battalion HQ, brigade HQ. Then, as this information is being communicated through radio and then it got intercepted, or maybe through electronic satellite means and then it got hacked. Yeah, that's how they probably know. But the reality is no one will tell you the truth. Yeah, I agree with newer econs. It's more important to look at the geographical strength, in the sense that so what is the strategic situation right now with Russia capturing Bakhmut? That presents a huge problem because now Russia possess a much bigger Voleda. If you imagine Voleda is difficult to capture for the Russians, now you have a massive Voleda right in the middle, and the Russians basically invested half a year or more to capture this Bakhmut, and they sent in their best troops, the Wagner forces, with airborne supporting the flanks, with airstrikes, massive artillery, and Wagner asking more artillery than they are supposed to get. They just keep whining about more and more ammo. The reality is they confirm they're gonna get enough, but they just want more because they want overwhelming power to conquer the city. So can the Ukrainians do the same thing? That would be a question. But of course, whether the Russians are able to defend Bakhmut as well as the Ukrainians did is a question mark, because from my understanding, the Ukrainians did throw a lot of troops into it, including foreign fighters, and foreign fighters tend to be very, very well trained. Ukrainian troops less so, because a lot of them are mobilized, lesser trained, but they got the numbers. And for most of the Battle of Bakhmut, the Ukrainians have more soldiers. So yeah, but it's just difficult, in this war. Every kilometer is just hard won. Yeah, so I think the geographical situation, the strategic situation is the key.
The question now is, how do you see the follow up of the battle of Bakhmut? Do you think that the Wagner forces are going to pull out for real? Do you think that the Russian armed forces are going to continue the battle? Is it going to be a stalemate? How do you see the evolution of the battlefield in the next few weeks?
Me? So I think the problem now is the Ukrainians. So there's all these rumors about Zaluzhny, the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, disappeared or maybe badly injured, and the Russian hacker group, Joker DPR, whom I actually rate as very highly credible, not reputable, as in they are not supposed to be good guys, because they're hackers, but the things that they say are highly credible, and their intel suggests that he's badly injured in a missile strike in Potova. And this caused a huge problem if it is real, and which is likely to be true, because it's really unusual. Ukraine cares a lot of their PR, their image, their branding, and all these rumors about Zaluzhny, not being around, and then they didn't force him to appear, just to shut everyone up. I think that's abnormal. Probably something really happened to him, and if that is true, then the entire battle plan is now out of the window. There's some leadership problem now to decide what to do next. And so we are only looking at Syrskyi and the commander of the land forces, but I'm not sure if he is actually have full decision power on this thing, because Zaluzhny is the one that has been communicating with the Western generals and commanders like NATO forces. I don't think Syrskyi is the one has been communicating. If you look at all the photos and everything, it's always Zaluzhny, meeting all the NATO commanders. I think we are seeing a massive delay in terms of the Ukrainian offensive. As far as I can tell, it is abnormal now. Everything is abnormal on the Ukrainian side now. So I suspect the entire Bakhmut offensive has went into like a stasis, like they're stuck, because now they do not know what's the follow-up. At first, they did the offensive, hitting the flanks. Now, even the offensive is kind of stopped.
But let's be honest, in my opinion, the attack on the flanks that everybody talked about was just a way, like a rescue mission for the guys in Bakhmut proper, because they only really took on the flanks, the heights, in order to secure a corridor for the guys in Bakhmut to properly withdraw. For me, that's all I see, because the moment they stopped withdrawing, the moment the evacuation was complete, they also stopped attacking on the flanks.
Yeah, the Russians have actually retaken some of that ground.
We
Yeah, I just want to comment on the withdrawal of the Ukrainian forces from Bakhmut. From what I know and from my sources, it doesn't seem that they have withdrawn anyone at all, or at the very least, no withdrawal operation or retreat from Bakhmut. As far as I know, they continued sending troops until they actually lost it, until they were pushed out. And that all actually falls in line with the logical thinking that I think the Ukrainians have, and that is that they wanted to hold Bakhmut at all costs. And this attack on the flank could have been some sort of operation thinking, okay, if we manage to push back, take Klishivka, for example, which is the fortified village to the southwest of Bakhmut, then they could maybe get a foothold in the southwest of Bakhmut and hold that position, maybe push further north, because the strategy for the Ukrainians with Bakhmut, to my understanding, is that they wanted to hold the city until they launched their offensive. And I believe the operations on the flanks were also prepared by Zalushny. So if it is true, the rumors that Zalushny has been wounded, Zalushny, according to the sources he has from I think it is the same hacker group, that Zalushny has been wounded to the point that he will not be able to continue his role as the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces. So from my historical knowledge, losing a commander, the biggest thing about that is that the next one has to go into the standardized format that Zalushny has done. So that depends on multiple things. First off, how well has Zalushny prepared the next person to take over? Especially now where there's a lot of communication with NATO allies and so on. So there's a lot of different sources that he has to go to get a proper overview of the situation, but also like what plans they are using, what works, what doesn't work. Because Zalushny, in an interview he did, said that at the very start of the war, he kept trying different strategies to find out what worked. If they have to do that all over again, then they are in a very poor position, especially because they have lost so many troops trying out those different tactics. And so in general, it all depends on whether or not this rumor is true. That could completely change the situation around Bakhmut and on the front in general. Because if it is true, then most likely the Ukrainian army will not be able to adapt to the situation, to the developing situation, which would allow the Russian forces to not just win in the stalemate, but to actually get and prepare a larger operation. Because if the Ukrainians are unable to adapt properly to that, then they can overrun Ukrainian positions. And that is the worst thing that could happen in this scenario. However, if the rumors aren't true and Zalushny is still alive, still not hurt and so on, then they most likely they will both try to look to get the upper hand and then launch an offensive. Because we are entering the summer season, and in the summer, there's perfect weather conditions for offensives. We have seen it in World War II in the summer and in the winter. That's when things happen. In the fall and in the spring, it's a stalemate.
But do you see the Russian army, the Russian armed forces, now that Wagner is pulling out, do you see the Russian armed forces continuing the offensive towards Chasiv Yar, for example, towards Slavyansk? Do you see something like this happening?
Right now? No, because the weather is terrible. If you go and Google the weather in Bakhmut, it is not just rain, it's also thunder and lightning for the next week. So at the very least...
Okay, but let's say in the next 2-3 weeks.
Then yes, I do believe that they are performing a rotation right now. As I said earlier, Remy, my go-to guy, he says that Wagner is going to pull out and they're going to reorganize. They, according to Prigozhin, they get 10,000 applications every month. So all of these casualties, if they have lost 20, 30, 40,000, then they would all be replaced. So essentially, Wagner is going to be a force that will be there throughout the whole war until the end. However, they're going to need their operational pause. They've been fighting in Bakhmut for 9 months. And according to what we've seen Russia doing, whenever they achieve success somewhere, they do an operational pause. They did it in Mariupol, they did it in Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, and they're probably going to do it now in Bakhmut. So Wagner will continue. The Russian forces, I do believe that they are planning something, because if we look at the battlefield, we have seen a decrease in the amount of armored vehicles being used. So most likely they are saving up on those to try and build up a force. At the same time, we see them increase their training of their Air Force, both helicopter pilots and plane pilots, jet pilots, to the point that even the British UK Ministry of Defense, they even said that they have prepared 3 squadrons of fighter jets and helicopter pilots who are going to be their elite force. So Russia's preparing the Air Force, they're preparing their armored vehicles, and they also have a lot of soldiers in reserve. They have everything that is needed for an offensive.
I wanted to talk about this too. So we haven't seen much action of the motorized infantry. We've seen some action on the flanks in Bakhmut, but we haven't seen the Russian armed forces really get into the battle since Bakhmut, actually, which sorts of confirms this thing that Prigozhin said in his victory speech, that the Battle of Bakhmut was meant to gain time for the Russian army to prepare and train and to recover from the disasters that happened in Kharkiv, in Kherson, and all this. And in a way, from what I see in the losses, motorized infantry, tanks, and everything haven't really been used. So it goes hand in hand with your theory. But now they've been training for 6 months. All the mobilized men, we haven't really seen them come into action. We don't really see this 500,000 men on the front. So this is the big thing that kept me wondering. What do you think, New World Econ, DPA? New World Econ, you go first.
I'm sorry, can you restate that?
What do you think is the plan with the Russian armed forces? We haven't seen this 500,000 men into action.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't subscribe to like some of the opinions that some of the more mainstream opinions like you're seeing from mainstream news media, or even like geopolitical commentators like Peter Zion, people that are like saying that the Russians basically used up all of their manpower over the wintertime in Bakhmut. Just seems like complete bullshit to me. Outside of Bakhmut, the Russians were carrying out combat activities in Kreminna, Avdiivka, Vuhledar, and Marinka, but these were relatively small battles, with the exception of the assault on Vuhledar. Seemed to be quite a bit of combat power. But compared to Bakhmut, they were all relatively small battles, and I think I'm correct in the assumption that you can't even compare the casualties from those places to what was going on in Bakhmut. And from what I've seen in Bakhmut, like the majority of the casualties seem to have been taken on by the Wagner mercenary group, with the largest cohort of those being, the prisoner, the penal battalions that they raised. So that like you're saying, that leaves this big question, is like, what the hell happened to these 300,000 recruits, or draftees, whatever you want to call them, that Russia raised up back in late October, early November. And I mean, the only possible explanation that I can see is that these guys are just sitting around waiting for something. I think there probably is a Russian plan for a Russian offensive this year. I don't know why there wouldn't be. They, were talking a whole bunch about how there was going to be one over the winter. That was obviously just a media campaign at this point. We can't take them at face value for, what they're saying. But I mean, it definitely seems clear to me that like they have significant combat power, in terms of manpower and equipment saved up. I don't know if you guys have seen, but like there's been several videos that have come out, which of course this does come from the Russians, so like they are going to be picking and choosing what they show to the world. But there have been several videos coming out of Shoigu visiting various different frontline, or not front line, but like near front. I don't know, supply points maybe. But there was one where he stopped off. He stopped by outside of Rostov, and there was just hundreds and hundreds of tanks lined up. T-90 tanks, modernized T-72 tanks, other various armored vehicles, like just sitting around waiting. They're not even part of the fight yet, and that is one of probably, I mean, 5 or 6 central locations that the Russians are like pumping, material and logistics into this Ukrainian fight, right? Like you have certainly a lot of troops and material that have been staged in Crimea for the Russians. They probably have troops and material in Melitopol closer to the front. They also probably are using, or definitely are using Voronezh and Belgorod, and to a lesser extent Kursk and Bryansk for these purposes too. So I would guess that the Russians probably have like large armored forces staged in all of these places. And with that being said, you got the manpower, you have the equipment. I don't see why Russia wouldn't be looking to launch an offensive this year. The only reason why I don't think it started already is because just kind of a waiting game to see what the Ukrainians are going to do.
Mm-hmm. And UDPA.
Yeah. So I did push out this possibility that the Russians are simply just waiting. The I forgot in which section that I was on. I did mention that it's just like in the real time strategy game. When we play computer games, we set up a kill zone when we're playing against the AI, and because we know that the AI will definitely have to attack because that's how the AI is programmed. They will attack. They will try to kill off the human player. So usually the AI is much faster than human, right? So we will create a kill zone in some choke points and then just wait for the AI to come. When the AI is spent, that's when the human players start to go into the offensive. And I think this is somewhat is happening. I believe is likely happening on the Russian side. The Russians did not want to attack because they believe that the Ukrainians is going to come. They have no choice. They have to come. The Ukrainians eventually will have to do the offensive because their entire army is powered by that, powered by goodwill, powered by NATO support that that will end if they cannot see battlefield results. It doesn't matter what the EU or the NATO are saying. No population within the European or the Canada or US or any of these US allies, their populations will not be able to indefinitely support Ukraine if Ukraine cannot show that they can have results from the kind of support they are giving. Because if there's no results or the Ukrainians are not doing anything, then they will start to ask for Ukraine to repay the money.
But DPA, the battle of attrition is going in favor of Ukraine. This is what the media is saying. They're saying that Bakhmut was a battle of attrition that destroyed the Russian army. So
I wouldn't say that it. Okay, so to be a more realistic, let's say not propagandic or not misinformationist, we have to say that the Europeans indeed is also in a battle of attrition, but they were hoping that they can grind out Russia geopolitically and economically. Both is going sideways now. Is not going the way they expected. The Russians are also playing a battle of attrition, but they are expecting Ukraine to collapse in terms of politically, economically, because the European Union's countries are not able to sustain this war. The economics, the trading and everything is just is putting tremendous stress on their local politics. Russia is betting on that, and also militarily because Ukraine have to attack, and the Russians have no rush because theirs are mobilized troops. Those are basically a free army in a sense that because just by the increased oil sales and through higher oil price, they basically is all paid for. So it is kind of a conundrum for the West, and it's also a very very hard job for Zelensky to manage this war.
I also think that for Ukraine, the big problem, and this is the argument, is that if this war of attrition was really going in favor of Ukraine, they wouldn't really need to attack either. The fact that they need to attack goes to show that the battle of attrition is going against them, that it's not 1-to-1. And even if it was 1-to-1, we're in a scenario very similar to, for example, the US Civil War, where you have the Union forces that have way more troops than the Confederates. And even if they go on the battle and lose 1-for-1, well, continuously, the country, the army with the less troops, will lose no matter what. So for Ukraine to wage this so-called battle of attrition doesn't make sense in any way, because they're the smaller nation. So they need to attack, because attrition, when you're the small guy, it's disaster in X amount of time, no matter what.
I mean, you could be right also. It could be like, we are not seeing the offensive because they say they think that they don't have to attack. I mean, that could be also a valid way of thinking. It's not exactly wrong. Except that the Ukrainians have a lot of mercenaries, so you have to pay for that. Whether Ukraine
mercenaries, the volunteers.
Okay, foreign fighters or volunteers. Okay, paid volunteers.
Volunteers.
Yeah, I mean, those have to be paid for, and then they basically is fully, the entire government service is run by loans, by grants from Europe. So I'm not sure how much money Europe can continue to throw into Ukraine. Maybe they could. I mean, Europeans are rich, right? So yeah. What do you guys think?
What's up? I'm European. So we just got news a couple of days ago from our local news media stating that we suddenly magically found $2 billion in our extra that we hadn't accounted for.
Oh wow, how generous.
So yeah, magically we'll probably have enough money to fund Ukraine if it needs to be. But yeah, going a little bit away from the funding, I think something very interesting is that I started doing daily polls on my channel, and one of the latest polls I did yesterday was, who do you think will launch an offensive and when? Then I gave 4 options: Russia before July, Russia after July, Ukraine before July, Ukraine after July. And if we look at the results, I don't really have them in front of me right now, but essentially it was fairly even. I think it was 52% Ukraine, 48% Russia. And Russia was 25% before July, 23% after July. Ukraine was 39% before July, and 12% after July. The vast majority believes that if Ukraine is the one to launch an offensive, it would be before July. And as for the Russian side, they would expect it either before or after. It doesn't matter. What matters is that Russia has the ability to take its time, while Ukraine is on a timetable. They have to do it now. The longer they delay it, the more they will be attrited, the less they will have to actually launch the offensive. And at the same time, we see the European countries, United States and so on, keep sending more and more equipment. We now get F-16 fighter jets. They're going to train them.
4 months.
They've already trained them.
That's enough. 4 months of training is obviously
apparently
enough.
4 months.
4 months. Yeah. It's takes some people more time to drive cars, but I guess F-16 is easier. I don't know.
I do want to add one more point, is that Ukraine is not just there's a need for, maybe there's a timetable of sorts, but there's one more thing, is that they do not have air superiority, nor the artillery superiority or missile superiority, which means that every day that they waste not doing an offensive or not trying to get the initiative of the actions on the ground, they go to get bombarded on a daily basis. And they are getting bombarded on the daily basis. You cannot even gather a decent size of force without getting noticed by drones or by satellite. And then comes a missile strike, an air strike, and the Russians, with their new glide bombs, where they modified their normal bombs, massive bombs, 500 kilogram, 250 kilogram bombs, even some rumors that 1,500 kilogram bombs with wings, which they can glide for between 50 to 80 kilometers away from the front line.
Mm-hmm.
That is actually causing havoc for the Ukrainians. Every day they wait, you're just waiting to die. if you are in position, you better be away from your equipment because you do not know when a bomb will drop. And this is also very difficult because even with all these donated or given or bought surface-to-air missiles, most of these missile systems do not have the range to engage Russian bombers or fighter bombers that are dropping all these glide bombs, because the window to catch them is 30 seconds or give you at most 1 minute. If you are putting a Patriot very close to the front, maybe you have 1 minute. That is not enough. That is not effective. The only effective surface-to-air missile that could have done something is the S-300, which the Ukrainians, again, based on the leaked NATO documents, basically they are running out. So even with the Patriot missiles, these are not exactly good enough to help the Ukrainian forces to defend the front lines. And that also means that when they go into an offensive, that also means higher casualties, because Patriot is not mobile. It's static installation where you have the setup and everything. It's not like it's not like a pencil when you can drive along with the front or the shulker. So maybe they got the gear part and everything, but no, gear part cannot fire 100 kilometers at a fighter jet. So yeah, I think this is also something to take into consideration, especially if you guys are pro-Ukrainian. Those viewers, you can continue to cheer for your Ukraine, but you have to understand what are the difficulties. Then you can actually talk among the peers, talk to your ministers or your MPs, try to raise issue to help Ukraine to get better surface-to-air missile solutions. So yeah, so it's not just about whether you're pro or not pro, but it's like if you are pro-Ukrainian and then you are not making the right arguments and discussions among your circle to talk to your MPs, your representative, so that your defense ministers and leaders, presidents, prime ministers are not making the right decision for Ukraine, Ukraine is going to lose this war. I can tell you that. F-16s is Singapore Air Force also have F-16s. So F-16 is a very flexible aircraft. It can be a air-to-air fighter. It can also be a surface. It can be a ground attack aircraft. That's why I believe Ukraine is looking for F-16s, because they are going to run out of their ground attack aircraft, the Sukhoi 24 or Sukhoi 25. They're going to run out. So the F-16s can actually do the dual role. They can do air-to-air, which then helps them, at least get some air-to-air systems to shoot down some Russian helicopters or ground attack aircrafts. Then they can actually also use it, to attack ground targets. So this is something that I thought maybe some of you guys might want to know. Talking about the viewers, I'm quite sure the speakers all know already. He became the moon.
Just to quickly play the devil's advocate, Wyatt, you were saying that every day that passes by, Ukrainian positions get bombarded by rockets, by artillery. I agree on you with that point, especially since the numbers speak for themselves. Russia has launched 5,000 cruise missiles. They've launched over 10 million artillery strikes in Ukraine. But just to play the devil's advocate, doesn't Ukraine also do the same? They've received the HIMARS system. Whoa, they received a lot of systems. They have taken all of Denmark's
Javelins,
Saint
artillery. Javelin, Saint HIMARS.
So the difference is that when you fire an artillery, if you have the actual anti-artillery radar, you can actually geolocate. You can actually detect based on the shell trajectory or the sound. There's a lot of different systems or radar. They are able to detect where the artillery fires from, and then you can do counter artillery. But you cannot counter a missile. You cannot counter an airstrike. So that is the problem. So when the Ukrainians fire the artillery, of course they can fire artillery because you can hide an artillery easily. You can drive and then you can park and then you fire. But that will attract instant counter artillery fire from the Russians. So, but then your positions will continue to get destroyed by airstrikes. So that's the unbalanced part about this. The Ukrainians cannot launch an airstrike, and then there's definitely chances to get away. But if you look at the Russian Defense Ministry report, most of the time the Ukrainian aircraft is shot down by the Air Force nowadays. Is by the by air superiority fighters. if you believe in the Russian Ministry of Defense reports. So, and they are usually getting shot down 20 to 40 kilometers away from the front line. So the Ukrainians, even when they send in their air force, is going to have problems, because if the surface-to-air missiles sites are not taking you down, the Russian fighters are looking for you, and the Russians do have pretty good long-range missiles, which I think rivals or have better range than the 120, the AIM 120 MRAMs. So yeah, this is.
And you're right.
It's
The air superiority. I think it's you're right, because we're always talking about the Leopard 2s, the Challengers, and everything. But imagine that they actually launched the assault against fortified positions in Zaporozhye, like everybody talked about, and they don't have air superiority. We already saw what happens to Leopard 2s when they're fighting against Ali in Syria that has a couple IEDs and RPGs. So what happens when Yuri has all the modern equipment, especially when they're in compact formation? It's gonna be something. That's why they absolutely need some air defense, all this equipment that they're asking for, because most people don't understand how it works. It's highly technical, but if you don't have this umbrella over your head, the shells are gonna rain.
That brings me back to the just now the earlier discussion about Bakhmut, where you alluded to the Ukrainian offensive is just to open a corridor for the possibility of resupply or retreat. My view is actually different. I view it as a legitimate offensive, but they got caught by surprise in a way that they never expected the Russians to just run away, to redraw, and the Russians, the moment the line broke, immediately they do a mass withdrawal to the next line of the defense, and it's all choke points. And it's only in the southern flank that was struggling, because there's no real choke points in the southern flank, and that's where also we see the Ukrainian forces try harder to, and the fact that they are trying so hard, it shows that it's not just a matter of opening up. It's not like what happened in the Battle of Liman, where the Russians do a counter-offensive, break open to help allow the volunteer force, the BAS 13 troops, to withdraw, and then all withdraw to Crimea. It's not the kind of thing. It's like, no, they do a counter-offensive, and then the lines got stagnant for a week. So
it could be both. It could be both. It could be both.
It could be it could be dual purpose, but I believe the offensive was legitimate. It's just that when they really pushed to the point where they hit the actual defense line, where the Russians really planted their real defense, their strongest defense, they cannot break through. And I think this presents a huge problem, I think, for the Ukrainians as well.
I kind of disagree, because from a tactical perspective, the Russian positions near the road of life or road of death, near Kharkov in the north, the Russians were literally on the road. Then in the south with Ivanivsky, they were also extremely close. Carrying out a retreat is extremely complex. At any point, if the Russians actually closed off, like just push 500 meters more, you have what? How many men? 5,000 men blockaded and stuck in open terrain. So I'm pretty sure the goal was to expand. Now it's very possible that they wanted to expand more than what they actually expanded by saying, look, we'll expand to this line, and the Russians caught them off guard. But I'm pretty sure what happened there was to pull out the troops, because they're not dumb. Let's be honest. A lot of Ukrainian generals, I posted it in some of my videos, since February, they're like, okay, the Russians have crossed the river north and south. There's no point in holding Bakhmut. So I'm sure there's this contingent of Ukrainian officers that always wanted to pull out, while some others wanted to stay. Perhaps it's linked to that Zaluzhny thing. Perhaps the moment that Zaluzhny was not in command anymore, they're like, okay, he was the one that wanted to stay, and perhaps others decided to pull the plug. We don't know, but for me, the number of troops that the Ukrainians sent, and I think in one of your videos, DPA, you mentioned it, it's 3 battalions of assault units. 3 battalions not enough to actually change the balance when the Russians have so many troops. I don't think it was a real offensive. And in a way, for the Ukrainians, it was a good teaching as to what the Russians might do elsewhere on the front, by saying, okay, the first line of defense is not the actual one, and that they have to already bombard the second line if they want to achieve a breakthrough. So it could have been some sort of preparation that they learn how the enemy reacts. New World Econ, what's happening?
Yeah, so and you're talking about that in the context of Bakhmut, right? Correct, on the flanks.
Somebody was paying attention.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got an email. Yeah, I don't think I don't think that the activities around Bakhmut was a legitimate offensive. I think it was just to clear the way and open up the flanks some. I think that Ukraine probably is going to commit to a bigger offensive. There are some very big questions to how successful that would be. I think, and the main piece of evidence that I would cite are these massive strikes that the Russians have been carrying out inside of Ukraine. What is like Pavlograd saw a pretty good strike one day. Khmelnytsky, probably saying that wrong. Massive detonations of ammunition in there. There's been several others all throughout Ukraine. So I worry that Ukraine might not have the capacity to even carry out a major offensive, but I don't think that's going to stop them from actually trying to do it. I think that, and like you were saying with, potentially the battles around Bakhmut and the counterattacks that the Ukrainians were launching, could serve as a test for the Ukrainians as well. Learning a little bit more about how the Russian army is behaving in these defensive operations on their side. I would think that probably if Ukraine does commit to an offensive, they're probably going to move a lot of units out of the Bakhmut area in order to do that. Some, especially units like the 93rd Mechanized Brigade and some of the more experienced units there. I don't think that they're going to get a break, unfortunately.
That's all I have for you today. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And thank you for staying until the end of this special headquarters meetup. So make sure to check out part 2 of this epic roundtable when I'm done working on it. Maybe in 24 hours, maybe more.